The series premiere of Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions featured The Undertaker as his first guest, and this is not The Undertaker, the gimmick. This is Mark Calloway talking in an interview. And we never really get to see this because Vince McMahon and Taker are both very protective of the gimmick. However, we're seeing him in this sort of environment. He's not Taker, he's just Mark. And the last time I remember him doing an interview like this was with Michael Landsberg. That was on the TSN Canadian version of ESPN. He did an interview there, but he rarely ever does these kinds of interviews. So it's going to be really interesting, and we're going to be talking about his career. And they start off, they talk about how they first knew each other. They've known each other since 1989, and they never really traveled much with each other. Austin was alone. Undertaker traveled with his own crew and stuff. So they got a lot in common. I think they were born around the same time. Austin was born in Austin, Texas, and Undertaker was born in Houston, Texas. But I think they live in different parts of Texas now. I'm pretty sure Undertaker lives in Austin, Texas now. I think Austin, he lives in California and a part of Texas. I don't know if it's Austin. I think it might be Victoria, because that's where they always say he was from. And they both graduated high school same year, 1983. So they mention Houston wrestling. That's when they really started to both watch wrestling. And the interview goes on from there. They talk a lot about Houston, and then we get to... And he talks about how one of the promoters told him to his face, "You will never draw someone to see you wrestle." And obviously Undertaker proved him wrong, but I've heard that story before, and that really motivated him, and he left that territory later, and boy, did he ever prove him wrong. So he has a relationship with Paul Heyman, and Paul Heyman sees something in him, and boy, Paul Heyman has a good eye for talent, and eventually Undertaker would get a meeting with Vince McMahon, and he meets Vince at his house. That's how they would do it back then. There was no Titan Tower or anything like that in those days, I don't believe. So he goes to meet Vince at his house. He tells Vince that he's good at singing in the shower, and he messes up there. Undertaker knows it because they have some really bad gimmicks. And, he would later go on to say of how, they're really talking about how bad the gimmicks were. That's when you had Doink the Clown and stuff like that. The Gobbledygooker, Duke, the Dumpster. There's just awful gimmicks. And he was even afraid he was going to be called the Eggman. And going back to the meeting with Vince, he says Vince doesn't have anything for him right now, and he wasn't expecting that. And of course, things would change later on. Now we get to the call. This is the infamous call, and when Vince McMahon asks him, "Am I talking to The Undertaker?" And Undertaker goes into detail to tell the story. But before they tell the story, they have to have a shot of whiskey. So before he gets the call, Undertaker's watching what they're doing, and they have a gigantic egg on the set. And this is the Gobbledygooker, and Undertaker is afraid, this is me, because he's supposed to be contacted by Vince soon. He's thinking to himself, okay, this is me for sure, because I'm Eggman. I'm going to be the Eggman, and he is just stressed about it. This is the worst gimmick ever, Eggman. They need to do a gimmick of Eggman as a parody and have Undertaker destroy him. But that's funny, Eggman. Then he gets the call, and Vince asks him, "Is this The Undertaker?" And the rest is history. Undertaker, at the time, doesn't even know what the term Undertaker means, but he just goes with it because it doesn't sound like Eggman. And when he starts to craft the Undertaker gimmick, he starts to really understand he's playing a character, as Austin explains, rather than a wrestler. It is a wrestler, of course, but Undertaker, before that, was an athlete. He was a really good basketball player, but now it's a full-on character. Now we get to 1990, and this is where his debut is at the Survivor Series. Legendary entrance. Ted DiBiase introduces him, and you hear the theme music, and there's kids terrified. That was a classic moment in wrestling history. So he talks about what he wants the character to be, and then he talks about how he got influence from both Michael Myers from Halloween and Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th, and He talked about how those guys were in the right positions. They would lurk in the shadows, they'd stalk their victims, and they'd be at the right moment to kill you, to slash your throat, as he would say. And I really think Michael Myers in particular is where he got the zombie sit-up from. If you watch original Halloween, remember Michael Myers does the sit-up behind Laurie Strode? I think The Undertaker really got that zombie sit-up from Michael Myers, because he does it exactly the same, and it's still really effective, and it looks really scary still. But I'm convinced he is. I don't think he ever really mentions that, but he had to have gotten that sit-up from Michael Myers. Taker now talks about how he really had to make sure the work matched the character, and that's why I thought he was so effective, because the character of The Undertaker isn't like, a great athletic high flyer, which is what he can be, but he knew he couldn't do that because it had to match the character. He talked about how today's wrestlers are missing. I really think that's true. How many wrestlers today don't wrestle completely different from the way their gimmick is? And he really talked about how less is more, and that's 100% true. I mean, the work should match what the character is. And Taker now, he talks about how he had to live his gimmick, and he talks about Austin, his gimmick, and how great it was. But with Taker, it was like he couldn't show himself because he wanted to live it. And at the time, it's a lot easier. We don't have any cell phones and stuff like that. But he would even say, if you go back to his house at that time, he wouldn't find any other clothes with the color except for being colored black. Taker talks about his first match. He spikes Coco Beware with the tombstone, then he throws the American Dream. Dusty Rhodes over the top rope, and he has great respect for Dusty. He talks about the Mount Rushmores, the Flairs, the Dustys, the Steamboats, the races. He has a lot of respect for him. And Taker talked about how there was guys who were unhappy with the way he was wrestling because he would no-sell their moves. And then he talks about in that match in Survivor Series, how much it meant to him earlier. And I just noticed, actually, it's been 29 years since he's debuted. So they aired this special 29 years after his debut, and immediately after the Survivor Series, which was last night. So that was actually really cool that they did that. Now, Undertaker's talking about he would always go who he'd go for advice to, and it really surprised me. At first, I was probably going to say it's going to be Paul Bear, maybe Bruce Pritchard, someone like that. Instead, he says the one guy he always went to was Jake the Snake Roberts, and that was really interesting. And Jake, man, you go back and watch his promos, that guy was so good. It was insane how great of a promo Jake Roberts was, one of the all-time greats. So that was really cool that he mentioned Jake Roberts. And now they tell stories about matches, having good matches, and Jake Roberts wanted to have good matches, and Vince pulled him aside and says, what the hell are you doing? I got you in here to get over, not have good matches. And Undertaker talked about he has to put his ego aside to do the betterment of the character and do the betterment of business. And that really makes, that makes sense. I think if you're a guy in the wrestling business today, it does resonate. So many guys are so focused on what they do in the ring. Unfortunately, they do so much in the ring, none of it really matters anymore. Now we talked about how the gimmick keeps evolving, and eventually we get to the American Badass, and this is where the Attitude Era is, and the biggest reason there is Attitude is because of Austin, really, his gimmick. And Taker starts to talk about how he needed the character to evolve, and if he was still the original zombie Undertaker, he's kind of handcuffed, so he eventually becomes the American Badass. They really go over his classic debut as the American Badass from Judgment Day 2000. And man, that was awesome. What an incredible debut. He comes out, destroys DX, even though he cost The Rock the title because that was an Iron Man match. And Triple H got a fall from a DQ, so Triple H won the belt because of that. So he messed up, but that was still a classic entrance, and a classic return. That was, that was just awesome watching. That reminded me because that same year, Austin had a legendary return to a month before that, Backlash, and Austin, again, during a match with Triple H and The Rock, and he got one of the biggest ovations. Two of the biggest pops in WWE history were Austin at Backlash 2000, and then a month later, Undertaker at Judgment Day 2000. Taker then talks about Cypress Hill, and they were somewhere overseas, and it's a strange story. It's hard to explain. I don't know the significance of the story. It's like X-Pac was passed out, and he was there. I don't know if he beat people up or people were passed out from smoking weed. It was a strange story. I don't remember. But then they go back to on this bus. They're all hanging out. Around the circular table, you see Undertaker, you see Stone Cold, both of them are there. You see Scott Hall, you see Kevin Nash, you see Shawn Michaels, you see Triple H is there. X-Pac, I believe that's him. Paul Bearer, Jerry Briscoe, and a couple of the other guys. Can't really identify them. And this is a significant picture because it's on the tour that they're on, and this is right before Kevin Nash and Scott Hall would leave for WCW, and everything would change forever. So I guess they say Triple H does not drink much. They talk about the curtain call at the Garden next, and of course what would happen after that was WWF was furious, and they couldn't really do much because Kevin Nash and Scott Hall both went south to WCW. I think X-Pac left as well a little bit later, and Shawn was champion. So who are they going to punish? Well, the guy they punish is Triple H. And of course, Triple H was supposed to win King of the Ring that year. He gets pulled from that, and the new King of the Ring winner was going to be Stone Cold Steve Austin. And wow, everything changed after that. Austin does the classic Austin 316 speech, and the rest is history. Now we're getting to the Monday Night Wars, in which WCW kicked WWF's ass for about 2 years. From 96 to 98, before WWF would turn it around eventually. So Taker talks about how it was frustrating losing to WCW, and they were doing a lot of hokey shit, and that's when WCW really went up on them, and eventually once WWF turned it around, they took command after that. Taker gets asked about going to And now Taker talks about how he when he didn't leave for WCW, I was talking about earlier, and he's kept his loyalty to Vince, and he eventually talks about his relationship with Vince, and the two have been very close for many years. And Vince trusts him with stuff, trusts him with the gimmick, gives him more leeway than he'll give anyone else, obviously, with the amount of experience he has. And he says they butt heads many times. I think I remember hearing they had a fight a few years ago during Undertaker's program with Shane, but I don't know if that's been confirmed. So he talks about the ups and downs, but him and Vince, they really get along. And, he's a locker room leader, and he got that role for many years. And as Austin said, through all this time, throughout the last 30 years, there's been one constant in the WWE, and that's been The Undertaker. Now they later talk about Big Evil, which is kind of interesting. They're talking about the American Badass. And Taker says it was kind of a hybrid of the Deadman and American Badass before he would eventually transition back to the Deadman. Taker now gets to the program with Shawn Michaels and Triple H. He looks at the 4 matches at WrestleMania 25 with Shawn, 26 Shawn, 27 Triple H, and 28 Triple H, as this whole 4-year program that culminated with the end of an era and the Hell in a Cell, and of course the 3 of them walking up the ramp, embracing a classic moment. That he looks at that as a whole program, and as do I. I think that really, all those matches really fit together. He talks about the moment of him, Triple H, and Shawn up on the ramp. And he says, Austin asked him if he thought it was good to break the business, break kayfabe. But Taker says he was about to retire. You look at his eyes, he was done. He was considering retiring, and of course that didn't happen, but he was considering it. Austin starts talking about the matches he had with Triple H and Shawn, and Taker admits how much pain he was in, and he would say, the matches were great, you have adrenaline, but after it, a while after, he's in immense pain. And you can tell, going back and watching some of those matches, even other matches around that time, and post that, even worse, that guy is in so much pain, especially with his knees. It's hard to watch sometimes. And you watch that match with Roman Reigns, that was a sad match. That guy is just, man, he looks in pain doing anything. Really shouldn't have been wrestling, but, he did. Undertaker starts talking to himself. He's saying, don't stay too long. That's what he's saying about his career, and wow. I go back to this interview he did with Michael Landsberg, as I mentioned earlier. He talks with Landsberg. He kept saying, I don't want to be that guy who overstayed his welcome. I don't want to be that guy who can't move anymore, who's kind of a parody of himself. And you look back on the interview, it's like, oh, man, I hate to say it, but when you look at some of his recent matches, some of them have been better than others, but the match in particular, the match with Triple H last year, and then that tag team match with him and Kane against Shawn and Triple H, that was a disaster. So at times you look like, damn, this guy needs to retire. However, he has had some good matches recently. The match with Goldberg was another disaster, but that was kind of some botches. He's done some good stuff, but I think the problem with him is he was wrestling at such a high level with the Triple H match and the Shawn matches, those matches, that set the bar so high. Everything else that he does, he's trying to live up to those matches, and he's trying too hard in some of his matches. That's what I think the problem is. Taker now talks about when his match after with Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 33. He puts his gear in the middle of the ring, the hat, the trench coat, the gloves, everything's done. It looks like that's it. Undertaker at that time, he says it was over. I thought it was it. He thought it was it. Of course, it was not it. Now we finally get to the streak. I want to hear what his thoughts are on losing the streak to Brock and his memories from that match, and what his thoughts on of that whole situation. Because I remember hearing Vince had to talk him into it because Taker really didn't want to do it, and of course the fans are still furious to this day about that ending. So Undertaker talks about how during the first 5 minutes of the match, he gets concussed, so he doesn't remember much about anything from that match. So Taker has no memory of it. He remembers being in the hospital after the match. I know he was gone to the hospital because I remember hearing he collapsed after the match, and him and Vince went to the hospital. And Vince left WrestleMania that year, WrestleMania 30, and left it up to Triple H and Stephanie to run. But Vince went to the hospital with Taker, and Taker, his only remember is 4:30, 5:30 in the morning, he's talking about what happened, and his wife is telling him he has no idea where he is. So I didn't know it was that bad where he had to go to the hospital for the whole night. So that was kind of crazy. And Taker says the match messed him up because he doesn't know where he got concussed, so it actually hurt with his confidence. And that's crazy coming from someone with that much experience, but that's what he admitted to. So they briefly talk about the SummerSlam match in '98 where Undertaker accidentally knocked out Austin, and eventually Austin finally gets to Undertaker and he asks him, "Where are you now? Well, what's next for you? Are you still going to wrestle?" Something like that. And Undertaker says, well, he basically says, "I'm going to write my own ending, so I don't know. I mean, I suppose you're just going to keep wrestling until, Saudi Arabia cancels WWE's relationship, because that's where he's getting a lot of the money. But I think he'll just keep wrestling. I don't think he's really going to retire." Taker now he talks about again writing his own ending, and he talks about the only guy who really knew that was peace with his retirement was Shawn Michaels, and they talk about Austin's retirement, and Austin says he actually made the decision because his neck was so bad at the end. His last match was against The Rock at WrestleMania 19. And again, Taker says, I really don't know. Who knows when he's going to retire. And then Austin brings up the match with Goldberg at Saudi Arabia this past year. Now, as they talk more, they finish up talking about when Taker are going to hang it up. They start reminiscing about old times. Back in the business, back in the Attitude Era. Taker makes a comparison of the documentary when We Were Kings. It's about Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, and he goes, kind of reminds you, in the Attitude Era, we were all kings. That's definitely true. So I wasn't expecting them to take this turn. They go to Insurrection 2001. I guess Austin almost chopped off The Undertaker's ear, where he would have been like Foley is without an ear, one of his ears, but Taker's okay. And then they talk about the story of that's the same tour as the plane ride from hell, and Undertaker remembers Kurt Angle and Vince McMahon wrestling on the floor of a plane. Michael Hayes gets his ponytail cut off. Remember that? I remember Brock and Lesnar and Kurt Hennig get into a fight and they almost break the door of the plane ride from hell. Goldust is singing to his ex-wife on the PA. Scott Hall's drunk. They're hitting on waitresses there, actually. On the plane, people got lawsuits. Hall was fired, I believe, after it. They're doing all sorts of drugs. It's just craziness. So I guess Angle and Vince are wrestling. Undertaker thinks it's a shoot, so he accidentally puts Kurt Angle in the chokehold and chokes out Kurt Angle on the plane. That's actually hilarious. And then Taker says, once he knew what was going on, it was all work, he goes back to sleep. That's hilarious. So they reminisce about some old times that were really funny. Some old cool times. There was a giant headlock chain they did in a stadium in Kuwait. I didn't know that existed. There's a power of chain or chain power thing. I don't know what they were talking about there. And they reminisce about some old stuff. Kind of funny how it ends with an icebreaker. Cool times on Raw where Taker almost laughed. Some old stuff from 2000, 2001 that I remember pretty well. 2002 as well. And that wraps it up. That ends the first Broken Skull sessions. I'm sure we'll get many more. It's hard to top this. How do you start with a bigger guest than The Undertaker, and how do you follow that? But he has a massive guest with Taker. It was a very good episode. I really enjoyed Broken Skull sessions. I enjoyed it a lot. We got to hear a lot from Undertaker. It was cool seeing him in this environment, and I'd recommend watching. If you're a fan of The Attitude or a fan of Stone Cold, fan of The Undertaker, you're really going to love it. So a very, very enjoyable interview, and I really enjoyed watching it.